Good afternoon. I'm Master Warrant Officer Scott Schall. I'm the Squadron Sergeant Major for A Squadron at the South Alberta Light Horse here in Medicine Hat, Alberta. This afternoon I am talking with Wes Krause, current curator of the South Alberta Light Horse Regimental Museum. It's great to have you here this afternoon, Wes.
Well, thank you for having me. This is kind of a different thing because normally I'm doing the interviewing and I'd be interviewing you, so this is kind of different for me.
Well, all sides of the story have to be taken, and
Awesome.
Today we're going to get your chunk.
Thank you.
So I know that you have the curator of the museum linked in now. You've been here for almost a year now. What brought you to be the curator here?
Well, actually, I was actually invited by the commanding officer of the squadron here, as well as the commanding officer of the regiment. Now, I actually met, at that time, Captain Payne, now he's Major Payne, and at one of the USI meetings. And we seemed to just kind of hit off. Basically, I was really interested in history, did a lot of work with that personally. And also, too, the commanding officer at the time, Lieutenant Colonel Colin Michaud, I actually ran into him at a couple of gun shows and stuff like that, and we actually had a little bit of rapport talking about military history in general. Now, also, too, the regiment, they sponsored a couple of military heritage exhibitions, and one of them was tied in with one of the parades that we had here, or the regiment had here. And I was asked if I'd be interested in putting up a display of military uniforms and equipment, and so which I did. And that spun off to about, I believe it was 3 years or 3 or 4 years that I put up displays. And the last year was a fairly large display, but it was basically presenting military history. It may not have been directly related to the regiment, but it was military history nonetheless.
Well, it's important to have somebody that knows what they're talking about. When we're dealing with your own museum, you want to have somebody that knows how to give the presentation, how to give the right story and get that story put out there in the most effective means. So this isn't your first museum, though.
No, it isn't. No, I developed my own personal museum in the basement of my house, and that was about a 5-year project. And that was basically, and of course I'm doing that because I'm a bachelor. I don't have the War Department to answer to, so to speak, if you want to call it that. So I had free reign of doing whatever I wanted. And what I did was basically build the entire basement or turn it into a miniature museum. And that included display cases. Now, I'm not a carpenter, but I built, I believe it was 7 display cases, and they're featured in the main area of the basement. Mm-hmm. And then I've also brought in and imported full-size mannequins, and I've got them outfitted in period uniforms from World War I through World War II. But the other aspect of it was that motivated that construction project was I was running out of space. The collection was growing and growing quite rapidly, as in direct proportion to my bank account being drained. But that's not a worry there. So I needed space, but also I needed proper space. You just can't take a military uniform, whatever era, and just throw it up on a hanger and leave it in a old closet. They have to be properly stored, properly maintained. And because of the variety of uniforms, I've not only got just World War I or pre-World War I or World War II uniforms of wool construction and cotton construction, I've also got shearling jackets that are the leather with shearling bomber jackets. Mm-hmm. I learned early on you can't hang those on coat hangers. You have to have a special facility to store those laying flat. So I've learned a lot about how to preserve military artifacts, but that also comes through, it's kind of scary to think of it that way, but I've been involved in this for 40 years and have a lot of connections with friends that are fellow collectors and archivists and such like that, basically from around the globe and from overseas, from the UK, from Japan, from Greece, all over North America. And these guys are a wealth of information. Now, and very open in sharing that information. Like, how do I preserve this artifact, this wool patch? How should I do that? Well, here's a suggestion. Okay, do the research on it. Okay, now we find out that, oh, okay, certain type of container is the best way to not only store it, but also to take it out and show it to somebody without physically having to handle the artifact. And actually, I've incorporated that concept here into the museum, namely related to military insignia. And what I found when I first came on board in January, I found all our military insignia in the collection, museum's collection, was basically stored in cardboard boxes, and which really wasn't a bad thing. However, it took a lot of space, and it didn't really provide an easy way to find an artifact. If I wanted to find, say a Lord Strathcona horse shoulder patch, well, you'd have to search through 5 or 6 boxes to find it. Now you open one drawer, and that division of World War II is fitted in one Riker mount, we call them Riker mounts, and all the patches of that division are in there. So now you can just open one drawer, and there it is right there. And likewise relating to the regiment, the South Alberta Regiment and the 4th Canadian Armored Division of World War II, that's all sorted out. And that's another thing that, you know, I'm really hardcore anal, or what if you call it OCD going on. I like things organized, especially if you're dealing with a large volume of artifacts. Organization helps aid in the preservation, and that's a key thing that I was really, and I'm really hardcore into this, chasing it down and pursuing that to improve the process we have here. There was a process in place, but it's just a matter of streamlining it and improving it.
So it's not just necessarily telling a story, it's taking the story and actually making sure that it's available for future generations.
Exactly, and you know, unfortunately, it's human nature that old stuff, you know, why do you want to keep old stuff? Well, it's old, throw it away. No, don't do that, you know, especially when it comes to military artifacts. I just absolutely scared to death of seeing military artifacts. I don't care what era. It can be World War I, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam era, even Iraq or Afghanistan period. All of those things are military artifacts. They contribute to the story of the service of an individual. So, for example, yourself, you served in Afghanistan. Well, your uniform tells the story of what you did there. It may not speak directly to it, but rather than just reading that account of what you did, now here's the artifact that ties that together and gives it the actual persona, the actual identity, the actual experience. My God, that guy served over there, and he wore that? My God, how could he put up with that? And that's the whole idea of giving the people that come to the museum an experience, that to learn that, oh yeah, it wasn't just all sitting there smoking a cigarette and having a brew, and it wasn't all standing up and shooting. There's a lot of other things that tied in with it.
That's good. That's one of the things that's important to preserve, I think, with the museum, and I think you've come a long way to and done a lot of hard work to make sure that that is an aspect of the museum. So you've done a lot of work with preservation, and you've done a lot of work with revamping of the museums. And now, what's in store next? Once we get everything preserved, are we going to tell a different story, or are we going to continue the story?
Well, actually, the focus of the museum, and I have to compliment the gentleman that built the museum initially. He did a hell of a job. To really be quite honest with you, he's got good flow and everything. What my goal is to really focus as closely as possible to the core units that the South Alberta Light Horse are directly related to. And one of the things I noticed, it was kind of drifting off in different directions. So that's what I'm going to try to do, is bring it back into the really tight focus of the South Alberta Light Horse, the South Alberta Regiment, the 31st Battalion, the 15th Light Horse, and that traces our history right back to the turn of the century. So really working that angle as tightly as I can. Now, with that comes now, we have a lot of veterans, widows, and families that, I come back to the preservation aspect of it, that they've got material left of their family members, whether it's their parents, their grandfathers, or great-grandfathers. They don't know what to do with it. Well, most places and most smaller and most museums, larger museums, they have just tons of that stuff. We have a lot of that as well too. But I'm making the effort to say, hey, if you're going to entrust me and the Regimental Museum with saving and preserving your family's artifacts, we'll make every effort possible, humanly possible, to do so. Now, preservation is one thing, but maintaining that is another thing. And that takes just a lot of diligence of constantly, and I'm not saying constantly, that may not be the right word, but maintaining is just keeping an eye on things. And
being persistent in your preservation.
Exactly. And you know, too many times that, okay, you may follow proper technique initially, and you may not get back to viewing an artifact for a month or 2 months or 3 months, and you get back and then all of a sudden it's become deteriorated, it's gotten some water damage or some insect damage or something's happened. Well, then you failed. Essentially, the custodian of that artifact has failed. So it is a regular routine of, you know, checking, double checking, and just maintaining. And you know what? I find this just incredibly uplifting. And my enthusiasm, and the people here would probably note that as well too. Like, I just love being around military artifacts. And I'm not talking the soldiers, or you're like yourself as being a military
artifact.
There you go.
I will be. When I'm done, you can stuff me, Wes.
There you go. No thanks. But the artifacts that you used, you know, to me, a military artifact is an incredibly important thing. I do it in my personal life. I collect and preserve, and my collection is very large. And coming here and doing the same thing, am I applying the principles I use myself personally? I'm applying them here as well too, and doing the best I can.
Well, it's certainly a bang-up job. As you mentioned, they did a fantastic job to begin with to get this place to the caliber that it is. Yeah. And for you to have the patience, not the patience, the skill sets, the passion for this museum to keep it going, and not only keep it going, but pursue further direction is just incredible. That's the kind of passion that I think a lot of people in this world could probably do with a little bit more of. If they were passionate about certain things, that we would have a lot less troubles going on in this world, definitely. Now, we've got a lot of preservation going on, and in order to preserve things have to be here for a while, but is there anything new? What's come along new and recently, realizing this is now 2014, you know, what are we going to have to be preserving that's arriving nowadays?
We've got some very interesting groups of artifacts that have arrived, and that, again, I use that word again, that the Regimental Museum have been entrusted with. One in particular, and we did a presentation, official opening, so to speak, was a medal group for Padre Silcox. Now, the Padre was an honorary captain. He served with the South Alberta Regiment in World War II, and he was awarded a very prestigious medal, the member of the British Empire. Mm-hmm. His family had contacted me through the regiment and asked if, and it was really kind of surprising, they just asked, would the museum be interested in having this? And I couldn't say yes fast enough. And the fellow was kind of surprised. I said, really, well, what, you know, really, why would you want it? And I said, well, I've got a spot already set up that has a photo of Padre Silcox, and what I will do is expand on that and make it a really high-class looking display.
Give it the prominence it deserves.
Exactly, exactly. And my previous experience in doing displays, not only here, but I've done displays of military firearms and military uniforms. I've been doing that since 1978, and developed a concept then. And also I get really picky, you know, because I really get picky. I go to a museum and I look at something and I look at a display.
Could have done it better.
Yeah,
could have done this. Could have done that.
So I'm my biggest critic. So I stand back and I look at a space and I think, how can we fix that? Not necessarily that it needs fixing, but how can I make that presentable to the guy that's coming in, that's just walked off the street carrying a big gulp and a cheese dog, and sort of like, oh, that's pretty. No, I want a guy to stand there and look, wow.
You want to elicit a response.
Exactly. It may not be a case of, oh, well, that's really cool, I'm going to go start collecting something. I don't want him to do that. That's competition. I want him to realize and, acknowledge that I did not realize that those guys are related to us, and they did that. Wow, that's really good. As he takes another gulp of his big gulp and he walks away. But he had that momentary connection. If it sticks with him, fantastic. If it doesn't, oh well. But we did our part.
And you did something to elicit the response.
Now, I kind of drifted a little bit there, but the Padre Silcox group was an incredible group. We built up a display, revamped a small compact display with the artifacts that the two family members gave us, or donated to the museum. And then we had an opening. They were just incredibly enthralled. They couldn't believe the work that was done, and they were quite happy with that. But I did get another email from the other son of the family, and with more stuff, like, would you be interested? Oh, duh, of course. Well, we ended up getting a box like a cubic foot that weighed about 40 pounds. And we opened it up in the major's office there, and it's like a giddy little schoolgirl, like, look at this, that kind of thing. But realizing also, too, that these artifacts, wow, they're incredible. They're incredible artifacts, but they're stuffed in a box. So now they have, now the preservation kicks into gear. After the giddy schoolgirl type of collector sort of thing gets over the thrill, now it's like, we better preserve this.
Let's preserve this and figure out how we can get it out so that everybody can enjoy it.
Exactly. So that's one of the many projects that's going to be approached in the coming months and maybe into the new year, is expanding on that. Now another one, we had the regiment had the change of command recently, and with that there was the annual general meeting of the South Alberta Regimental Association. I hope I said that right. Yes, Regimental Association, as well as the South Alberta Veterans Association, also had a annual general meeting. Now, with that, we had a meet and greet prior to all the festivities on the Saturday, and got to meet up with some of the widows of the SAR vets, and incredible ladies, very friendly, very open and willing to talk and stuff like that. And then when they found out, well, hey, are you the curator of the museum? Well, hey, I've got this from my dad or my husband or my grandfather. It's like, wow, cool, okay. So there's one little package of stuff went into the storage room to be accessioned, and then, oh yeah, tug on your arm and say, oh yeah, oh, you're the curator, I've got this for you. You do? Oh, okay. Well, go and court that and put that into the museum to be accessioned. And then we had a lady, her name was Sheila McLeod. And her husband was Major Danny McLeod, awarded the Military Cross for actions with the South Alberta Regiment in World War II. And she basically posed the same question, but she asked a lot of very pertinent questions prior to that. What do you do with, like military artifacts? What do you do with this? How do you do that? And I explained it to her, and we explained my concept. And then finally, at the end of the discussion, she said, well, I need your address. And I said, well, why is that? I'm going to send you a box of stuff from Danny McLeod. And I think her look on her face was one of surprise, because she could probably see my jaw, bouncing off the floor, because I was just in total shock. And once I gathered my senses and all that, and I'm thanking her profusely, I gave her one of my cards, and then promptly made a beeline over to the major and said, you won't guess, Major Danny McLeod. And he, oh yeah, so what? Well, we've got the family is going to send us some stuff. Well, after he gathered his jaw up off the floor, it's like, we got to do things. So that generated another project that's going to be done in the coming months as well, in conjunction with the Silcox group. We're going to do an expansion of one of the displays. So we're going to see some changes in portions of the museum, in the museum footprint itself. It won't be dramatic, like we're not going to do crazy stuff, but you're going to see some of the displays that are focused on these men and their service to the South Alberta Regiment. As well, we're changing a few things on the outside areas of leading into the museum, and to say the least, the changes are, I'm looking forward to it. The only thing, again, I relate that to having a little bit of OCD in a way there. I like to see things done to their completion, but I have a high standard. And I know what I've got in my mind, what I want it to look like. I'm going to make it happen. And I'm looking at a spot right ahead of us here where I believe he was the former RSM, Alberta, he was honored to receive the Regimental Guidon in 1967. And we've got other photos of his that event. And we've actually got the kneeling stool that he kneeled on to receive the guidon from the princess at the time. I can't remember her name offhand, but I think it was Princess of Wellesley. I may be wrong, but either way. Now, in discussion with Alberta, he asked, would you be interested in having some of the artifacts from his service at that time? And once again, it was I couldn't get yes out fast enough, and I said, would you entrust not only myself but the regiment with those artifacts? And he said yes. And I said, I'll tell you right now, I know exactly what's going to happen. And he said, well, what's that? You're going to have a mannequin with your uniform on it, and there's going to be a display dedicated to the guidon presentation. And he was somewhat surprised, and he was very, very pleased to hear that. And that's going to be carried on as well, too.
Excellent. So there's a lot of projects coming up, and you're very little time to do it, and so little patience to get on to the next task and make sure that you get all of these glorious things done.
You know, I'm excited because that kind of thing, again, it's bringing stuff out to the people, to our visitors, that they may not have realized. You know, like, yeah, I can show you the G-Wagons and stuff like that out there, but this is our history here. And I say our history as in the regiment's history. And, you know, it's really kind of interesting, and it really hits me kind of hard because the regiment has basically said, you're part of our family. And it's like, huh? Really? And I said, I'm just here working for the museum. He said, yeah, but what you're doing is really positive, and you're part of our family. Oh, wow. I mean, that's incredible.
Take that pretty seriously in the South Alberta Light Horse. This is our family, and it extends from the newest of Army cadets that we sponsor right on up to the CO. Everybody is included in the same family.
Exactly.
I'm glad to see that it's been extended to the civilian assets as part of our association as well. So I'm looking at this and saying, you know, we've got a lot of work ahead of us. There's already been a super large amount of work that's already behind us. I don't think that there's anything that's going to be totally surprising in the next. As you mentioned, nothing is going to be a super big project on it, but you've got a lot of hard work ahead of you. And I'd just like to say at this point, you know what, thanks for all the hard work and dedication that you're putting into this right here, right now. And I think that it wouldn't be a far scene to have an interview in the future to see exactly where some of this stuff has come to fruition and see if any of those changes have made an impact on anything that's happened.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that, yeah.
So I'm Master Warrant Officer Scott Schall, and this has been A Century of Service. Join us again next time.